New Hampshire on Instagram. Good to see you. All right. We are live on both. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we are good to go. Georgia, Washington, hey, Facebook, if you're just now joining us, been on for a minute or so with Instagram. They've been letting me know where they're joining from, and so would love to hear the same from you on Facebook. So let us know where you're joining from. One of the coolest things these last few weeks has been seeing people join from around the country, and one of my hopes in this was that it would kind of feel like a virtual support group for people all over the country, no matter where you are on this journey. And it's been really neat to see that happen. So we are week 3 of the ReFraming Foster Care Book Club. St. Louis, good to see you. Michigan, awesome. North Dakota, awesome. I got to be in South Dakota not long ago before we weren't allowed to go anywhere, and it was wonderful. North Carolina, St. Louis, fantastic, awesome. So we are week 3, which we are halfway through our time tonight. We will be halfway through. So we are on week 3 of 5 weeks, every Sunday night in May, in recognition of Foster Care Awareness Month. So we're so grateful. I've gotten questions and comments from people all across the whole spectrum, people who are just now considering and saying this has been an encouragement for them, and so we're so grateful for that. And people who have been neck deep in this for quite a while, that we've been able to connect with and even connect them with other people, which has been super encouraging. You know, I read not long ago that this makes sense, of course, but you read it and you go, I hadn't put it that way before, that one of the best ways for us to predict what our future experiences are going to be like is to borrow from the past experiences of others. I love that idea, that there's people who have walked this journey and this road before us, and one of the best ways for us to really understand what's to come potentially in our future is to sit down and borrow from their past. And we've been able to make some really cool connections even through this kind of haphazard, casual book club these last few weeks, for people who are considering to be able to connect with those who've been down that road and get the encouragement and support that they need. So we are in week 3, and we are jumping in on chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12 this week. Before we do that, 1 or 2 quick things. Number 1, info@jasonjohnsonblog.com is the best and fastest way for you to let us know that you would like a proof of attendance for tonight. We can't guarantee that your agency will approve it for credits for training hours, but if you've worked that out with them, then email us info@jasonjohnsonblog.com. That's the best way. If you contact us through Facebook or any other way, it might take a little longer. So info@jasonjohnsonblog.com. And then second, we mentioned this the first week, and I want to reiterate it this week as well. And if you've read through the book, then hopefully you've caught on to this. But there's a question at the end of every chapter that's the same, no matter what the chapter is about. And it's in the plan of action section. As you go through the group discussion and the personal reflection questions, one of the things that I want to leave you with is this idea. Based on what's been discussed in this section, complete the following statement as thoroughly and honestly as you can. I will choose to honor God through this by fill in the blank. And I really just want to bring us back to that. You know, my hope for this book and for our interactions and our discussions is that we would see things from a new perspective, that we would be refreshed and encouraged in a new way, and that it might do one of 2 things or both things. It might, number 1, maybe change some attitudes or some perspectives that we've been holding internally, and based on what we've discussed, I will choose to honor God through maybe changing my attitude or changing my perspective or changing my outlook. Or number 2, some behaviors maybe. Maybe there's some behavioral things that need to change, some rhythms in our life, some things that we're participating in that just aren't healthy for us, and we need to adopt some healthy practices for ourselves. And so maybe the fill in the blank for you is, in light of what we've discussed, I will choose to honor God through this by blank, blank, blank. Changing some things that I do. So maybe changing some things that I believe or some ways that I think, and maybe also changing some things that I do, or both. And that's really the heart of this, is that it would drive us to transformation, and that it would drive us to transformation in Christ. That's the goal. I've been sitting in this place, and then we'll jump into chapter 9 in Scripture, where over and over and over again it talks about our thoughts. It talks about our minds. Back in the Psalms, God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. This idea that, hey, you and I don't always think the same way. That God is saying that to us, that sometimes your thoughts, Jason, are wrong, and mine are never wrong. And sometimes your thoughts are not my thoughts, and I think differently than you. So maybe there's times that I've thought things about myself, or I've thought things about others, or I've thought things about situations going on around me, and God's up there kind of going, hey, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the way that you're thinking about that, or you, or them. And then Paul in the book of Romans says that one of the most crucial areas of transformation and restoration that needs to take place in our lives through Christ is the renewal of our minds, so that we might be able to then test and approve what God's will is, so that we might then be able to see clearly what God does, what God's up to, and what God is like. That we need our minds to be renewed. We want to change the way that we think, and we want to align it with what's true in Scripture and with what's true in the gospel. And so in light of that, that's kind of the idea of reframing foster care, reframing the way that we think sometimes about certain things. Because maybe it's the case, if we were honest. I know it has been for me. I'm pretty sure that I've thought things or come to certain conclusions that maybe God just didn't agree with. He says, hey, I need you to change the way you think. I need you to see that from a different perspective. So in light of that, chapter 9, this week, we jump in to this idea of the perfect time to foster or adopt. So if you've already stepped in, you've crossed this hurdle, but it's kind of a hurdle that never really goes away. And so I'd be curious, even in the comments, to hear from you, like, what was it for you that helped you cross that bridge? Because there's a lot of people we know that are on these feeds and watching these videos that they're still wondering, is now the right time? Is this the perfect time? Here's all the reasons why I think it's the wrong time. And they're kind of tallying up all of these different things to help them determine whether or not it's the right time. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments, especially as you encourage them, like, what helped you? What made you kind of decide, you know what? There's a whole lot of reasons for me to say no right now, but there's a couple of few compelling reasons for me to say yes. And I'm going to choose to say yes because of those few compelling reasons. And here's what we found in our journey, and what I found in my journey in particular, is that I was waiting kind of for a certain metric of things to come together that ultimately were never going to come together. I was waiting for perhaps my kids to be the right age, or for life to slow down enough, or for the bank account to be full enough, or, right, all these things that, frankly, I don't know when you ever really arrive at those things. And I was just kind of waiting for these things that ultimately might not ever come, And it came down to deciding, you know what, I can come up with a whole lot of reasons as to why right now is not the right time. But there's only a few very small but significant, compelling reasons that are driving us to say yes to this. This is near to the heart of God. There are kids out there that need us now, and I can make all the excuses in the world, or I can simply say yes and trust Him with the rest. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not some bad times for us to do this, and some of you have felt those as well. If our marriages are unhealthy, or our families are unhealthy, or our finances are unhealthy, right? It's probably a good time for us to say, you know what? No, not right now. Not no, never, but just no, not right now. Just like we might with a couple who wants to get married and they go through premarital counseling. And they kind of uncover some things to discover, are you healthy? Are you healthy? Do you guys kind of understand and have realistic expectations going into this? It's not to add more hoops to the process for them. It's not to make moving towards marriage more difficult for them. It's simply a process we need to go through to ultimately make marriage better for us. And in the same light, let's ask ourselves some questions. Are we healthy? Are we good? And if so, then what's really keeping us back? What's really holding us back from this? And here's what we find, and many of you have already, there's never really a perfect time to foster or adopt. Because if we waited for life to slow down enough, who of us is going to say, you know what? We've worked so hard for years to get life to a place of peace and calm and tranquility. I have an idea. Let's completely destroy it by stepping into foster care. I just don't know that we're going to do that. So I don't know that waiting for the certain season of life where it's finally calm and peaceful is really going to help us, right? Let's just add chaos on top of the chaos. There's never really a perfect time to foster or adopt. There's just a lot of reasons for us to say no, despite all the reasons that we just might have to say yes, right? And so this is kind of an honest conversation. How do we know when it's the right time? I just got a long email yesterday. How do we know when it's the right time? Here's the age of our kids. Here's our story. Our kids were 6, 4, and 2. Our young church plant that I was pastoring was, I think, a couple years old. And my wife was a little more ready than I was. And this kind of bleeds into another one of the chapters we'll talk about here. May even be the next one. Let's see. The best thing you can do for your marriage. Yeah. So we were in a place where my wife was a little bit more ready than I was. Our girls were 6, 4, and 2. Our church plant was young. I was pastoring, busy season of life. And here's all the reasons in my mind why it's not the right time. And I'll never forget, we'd had many cordial conversations between the two of us. And one night she comes down after the girls had gone to bed and she says, you know what, Jason? There's never going to be a right time for us to do this. There's kids out there that need us now. It's just time to say yes. And she turned around and she walked back upstairs. And I'll never forget that 15-minute lag time between the time she said that and walked upstairs and the time that I finally followed her upstairs and said, you know what, you're right. I'd been using the age of my kids. I'd been using the season of life as an excuse to ultimately kind of curtail what I knew God wanted us to do. There's never going to be a perfect time. There's never going to be an exact right time. You know, this is an imperfect thing. We're stepping into hard and broken and difficult things. There's just never really a convenient time to do extremely hard things. We just choose to say yes, despite all the many reasons we might have to say no. So in light of that, like the question is, and the statement is, in light of that, like I choose to honor God by, like what's the fill in the blank for me, right? It might not mean I choose to honor God by diving in headfirst in the deep end. Maybe that's not it. Maybe for you, it's I choose to honor God by just taking the next most simple step forward. Maybe I choose to honor God by going to that next informational meeting, or I choose to honor God by going to that next orientation class, or I choose to honor God by setting up a time to get together with a family that is doing it or has done it and just hear their story and learn from them. I choose to honor God by just taking my next best simple step forward. I'm not much of a runner. As a matter of fact, I don't enjoy running. I don't understand how people enjoy running, and I don't really enjoy people that enjoy running. I'm joking, but like that's how extreme it gets sometimes. I don't understand how it's fun, right? It's grueling for me, and I'm in pain after. But on the rare occasion, and I actually have done this a few times recently, when on the rare occasion I make myself go out and run, it's a very short run compared to what runners run. It might be a couple of miles, but here's what I have learned to do for me, is if I focus on the 2-mile marker, I psych myself out, I convince myself the journey is not going to be worth it. It's going to be grueling and awful just to get to that 2-mile marker. And by the time I've kind of worked it up in my head, I've convinced myself, just don't do it. Just don't run. That sounds awful. So here's what I've learned how to do. I don't really focus on the 2-mile marker. I don't focus on the finish line necessarily. What I've discovered is that if I'm running in my neighborhood or I'm running at a park near our neighborhood, there's street lights or there's light posts that are placed along the side of the street or along the side of the track every 60, 80, 100 yards maybe. And so here's what I've discovered is that instead of running a 2-mile run, I can just run a series of 60 or 80 yard runs from one light post to the next light post. And every time I hit a light post, not literally run into the light post, but every time I cross another light post, there's a sense of satisfaction there. There's a sense of completion there. There's a sense of accomplishment there. I made it to the next light post, and I can already see the next one in front of me. I'm just running a series of short runs that cumulatively over time help pace me, help build in this rhythm of accomplishment and achievement, and then ultimately add up to a 2-mile run. So for you, it might not be that I need to know exactly what it's going to feel like to cross the 2-mile marker on this foster care journey. It might be for you that you just need to focus on the next light posts. And that's for any of us that are just now considering stepping into this, or maybe you've been in this for a while and you've become so fixated on the finish line that it's exhausting you now. And you're wondering, how long can I actually keep this pace up? And my encouragement to you would be to just identify what the next light post is and focus on that. And then when you get there, celebrate. Celebrate the faithfulness of God to bring you there. And then figure out what the next light post is and do the same. And then over time, it eventually adds up to a 2-mile run. So, the best thing you can do for your marriage in foster care, chapter 10. Again, it was one of the busiest seasons of our lives, and we're still in a busy season of life. And our journey led us into some pretty complex things, more so than when we started out. And we'll talk about that in some later chapters. But here's the big idea, is what I found and what we found. And this goes for anything, not just foster care, but any kind of mission or ministry that you're involved in. Even if that mission or ministry is just your own home, raising your own kids, is that we don't let our marriage become all about foster care. Or we don't let our marriage become all about our kids. Or we don't let our marriage become all about me being a pastor when I was a pastor and our church, right? That we don't let our marriage, the center of our marriage, be anything other than Jesus. And that's very easy to say, but very difficult to do. And so I'd be really curious to hear even some of your comments about how you guys, husbands and wives, like fight to keep your marriage a priority in this journey in some super practical ways. It might mean that, right now my wife and I, we take walks almost every night together, just the two of us and our dog around the block or even longer. And there's been times, frankly, where we've made it all the way around the block and we've gotten consumed by discussion about some crisis that's going on or some situation with a young 20-year-old and her kids who's in our life. And I felt, I really just needed that walk to not be about that. I just needed it to be about connecting with each other and talking about something else, right? And so we want to fight for that. We want to fight for some alone time. We want to fight for giving each other some space and how they can be refreshed. It might mean that when life starts opening up again, like, hey, wife, how about I manage the kids after dinner? You go walk around Target aimlessly for as long as you need to, just to have your soul filled up, right? And whatever it might be for your husband or vice versa, right? I love it. Jen says, what helped me was the idea that it wasn't convenient for these kids to come into care, so I can be a little inconvenienced to go through all the licensing hoops. That's nothing compared to what they have been or are going through. Love it. Love it. Awesome. So what are some practical ways that you guys fight to maintain the priority of the health of your marriage on this journey? For us, it was we just don't let our marriage become all about this journey. And we're going to set some parameters, and we're going to have some designated time where we take a walk around the block, and we're not talking about that. Or we're not going to end our day laying in bed talking about that. It's not going to be the first thing that we talk about when we wake up in the morning. And we're going to fight to give each other some space. We're also going to be fight to be free from some certain pressures or expectations that kind of externally are put on us. For example, firmly 100% believe in date night. For us, right now, in our stage of life, a weekly date night, very, very, very difficult. And so we're not going to feel guilty about that. We're just going to get creative with how we find a rhythm that works for us. So this is the appeal, and this is the encouragement, is that you guys would study each other and be so in tune with each other and ask each other questions so that you know like what works for you and what works best for us, because what works best for someone else, or the latest greatest book that we read, or the conference we attended, or the podcast from a marriage expert that we listened to, is now making us feel guilty that we don't do that. And I'd say take what you need to take, but also learn from each other and research each other so that you know what works best for you. So, the best thing you can do for your marriage. Last week we talked about spiritual warfare. I believe if you're married, the enemy has a bullseye on your back, and he wants foster care to absolutely obliterate your marriage. And for us to, at a minimum, be aware of that. I love that. Amanda says, play games. We love having fun one-on-one after the kids are asleep. We're in there all playing. My wife and I like to go out on the porch right now because the weather's great towards the end of the day, and we'll just watch a show and just totally numb out, right? Play a game, watch a show, find something that's just the two of you. What works for you? The enemy has a bullseye on the back of your marriage. And I'm convinced that one of the aspects of spiritual warfare that we talked about last week is that he wants to see foster care destroy your marriage. And one of the absolute best things that we can give kids as they enter into our home, whether it's for a day, a year, or a lifetime, is a picture and a model of what a healthy marriage looks like. There's times that my wife and I, in front of our kids on purpose, will play around and get close, and we kind of on purpose want our kids to see it, and they'll kind of get a little annoyed and be like, oh, gross, stop that, and our youngest will cover her eyes, but we want to do this on purpose. Like, we believe one of the best, most lasting gifts that we can give our kids is memories of growing up, seeing mom and dad like each other and love each other. Just a picture of a healthy marriage. So, I'd encourage you, if you haven't in a while, maybe even tonight, sit down with each other and say, hey, what works for you? And here's what works for me, and what works for us, and what are some things that we can do next week? In light of this discussion, let's choose to honor God by fill in the blank. The best thing you can do for your marriage in foster care. Chapter 11, foster care and what I feared most for my own kids. What I feared most for kids that were already in our home. Again, like I said, our girls were 6, 4, and 2 when we started this journey. And one of the benefits of starting the journey when we did is that for the most part, our girls don't understand life before foster care and adoption. They just understand this is just kind of how life has always been, right? There is no pre and post. And so if you're someone out there, you've got younger kids and you've started, or you've got younger kids or even no kids yet, and you're wondering, is now an okay time? One of the added benefits in that is that your kids that are already in your home grow up in an environment where this is just what we do. It's what we've always done. This is just our normal. We're not having to break an old normal for a new one. But going in, one of my fears was the effect that it was going to have on our biological girls. Was it going to take away from the time that we owed them? Was it going to take away from a certain lifestyle that they were due? Was it going to in any way rob them of joy and affection and closeness and time and space and capacity with us as a family? These were questions that I asked, and these are legitimate questions for us to be asking. As a matter of fact, if someone was stepping into foster care and hadn't really given much thought to the effect it's going to have on their home and their marriage and their biological kids and any other kids that are already in the home, then I'd say that's a big pause. Whoa, 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 this is something you need to be thinking about. But again, I was thinking about it through a certain lens. What's in it for them to lose? And I just felt like God saying, hey, look, my thoughts are not your thoughts. I disagree with the way that you are thinking about this in a vacuum. Yes, you need to be thinking about it that way, but you need to be thinking about it in a broader way as well. Not just what's in it for them to lose, but gosh, what potential gain do they have in this? And so I used to be afraid of the effects opening our home to foster care would have on our biological kids. Now, after the fact, I'm more afraid of the effects not opening our home to foster care would have had on our biological daughters. It is the gift that foster care has given them in terms of a worldview and a perspective and an understanding of what is going on in humanity around them. Kind of a breaking through of the facade, a peek behind the curtain. the gift that they've been given in that is a gift that foster care gave them that I don't know my wife and I would have ever been able to give them on our own. They now grow up in a new normal, in a different world. They've seen things that many kids have never seen. They have felt things that many kids can never feel. They have experienced things and sensed things and been grieved by things and been overjoyed by things that many kids their age just haven't had the privilege of participating in. Has it been difficult? Absolutely. Have they had police officers in their home because of it? Absolutely. Have they seen mom and dad weep as we've grieved the loss of a little girl leaving our home? Absolutely. They wept along with us. They've seen some hard things. They've seen some difficult things. And I believe in the end that they'll be better for it. And so the tension and the line that we have always tried to navigate as best as we can, and I'd be curious how you guys walk this as well, is here's kind of the standard line. We want our girls to feel the weight of this, but we don't want our girls to resent this. And that is a very fine line that is constantly moving and is up to us as parents and counsel around us to navigate and to steward well. So there have been times when my wife and I have been more ready to take breaks than even our own girls. We've said, hey, we just feel like it's a good time to take a break. And as a matter of fact, several months ago, we said, hey, we're thinking of maybe opening our home to respite. And one of our girls said, respite? Why respite? And we thought, why are you pushing back on respite? That's a good thing. And it's not that she was pushing back on respite. She was saying, why respite? Why are we not just fostering again right now, right? And so we have kind of found the tables turn in some circumstances, and I'd love to hear other stories of how you've seen this in your own home where, gosh, so ironic, God, I used to be afraid of the effect that it would have on them, and now in some cases, they've been the ones that have driven us and pushed us and challenged us towards this the most. I don't know what they're going to grow up and do. I don't know if they're going to grow up and become foster parents. I don't know how the Lord is going to use them as they grow. But what I do know is that they're growing up with an experience and an understanding that has been a gift to them, that I believe will act as seeds through which God will do some pretty amazing things in their lives. And I trust the same to be true for your own kids. Foster care and what I feared most for my own kids as these two worlds collide between them. There's a fine line between protecting our kids from the dangers of being exposed to hard things and protecting them from the dangers that are inherent and not having been exposed to hard things. There's a fine line between I want to protect my kids from all hard things and the dangers associated with that, and the dangers associated with protecting my kids from everything that's hard, if that makes sense. And that's a fine line that we as parents walk. I love it. Randy says, my kids understand familiar fluidity in a way I can never have imagined through foster care. So incredible. They've learned a unique aspect of constant love. Yeah. Amazing. Beautiful. I know Randy, and I know that what he says is true because I know his family, is that they just see things, and they've been given a gift by God to experience a new normal that they will grow up with and will somehow, in some ways, probably translate itself into their normal as adults. And the generational ripple effects that come from that are pretty significant. So let's go ahead and wrap up with the last chapter for tonight. There's actually a really great story in there. Every few chapters we put a story from a real life human being, a real life person in there that's not me. And I love the one on this chapter in particular from a friend of mine named Kylie. She grew up in a home that fostered, and she now works in the child welfare space, and she articulates the nuances, the beauty and the brokenness of growing up in that environment in a really, really, really beautiful way. And so we included a small piece of her story in the book there. So let's go ahead and wrap up with the husband who isn't sure. And you could replace that. Maybe the wife isn't sure. The husband who isn't sure. In our particular case, it was the husband. The husband who wasn't quite sure. Okay? My wife was a little farther down the road than I was. And again, I felt like my role was to protect my family. and to protect my girls. I actually had a great conversation with another dad who's considering foster care who felt the same way. I just feel the need to protect. And here's my story with that. We landed ourselves in an orientation class in Houston, and one of the very first things that the instructor of the class began to share with us was a case that had come across her desk maybe that week before. And it was the case of a young girl that was about the age of one of our young girls. And the tragedy that this little girl had experienced was revolting. And I sat there and found myself getting angry that no one was there to protect that little girl. And I was thinking, I would give my life to protect one of my little girls from those things happening to her. Why isn't anyone there to protect that little girl also? And of course, God's up there just kind of orchestrating as he does. And it dawns on me, I don't know that I've ever heard the audible voice of God, but I have heard kind of the inaudible voice of God through people around me. You know, I don't know that God speaks audibly to me, but he does speak clearly to us through people around us. And I just felt like in that moment, God's up there going, yeah, Jason, why isn't anyone there for that little girl just like you would be for your little girls? And that was it for me. This need to protect. And then God says, I've given you that need to protect. That is a God-given desire for you as husband, as father, to protect. And now I want you to expand that a little bit, and I want you to use it in ways that maybe you haven't thought of yet. So that was the first hurdle. The second one was, are we on the same page? Are we on the same page? And I want to talk to this for a moment, and then we'll wrap up. You know, one of the nomenclatures out there is, hey, we got to make sure you're on the same page. Make sure you're on the same page. And I absolutely 100% agree with that sentiment. But I think it's a little more nuanced than that. I've seen many, many people, including us sometimes, feel so pressured to make sure that we are absolutely 100% on the same page that it's actually stalled us or paralyzed us from moving forward, maybe to the next light post. Okay? So I don't know so much that it's necessary that we're always 100% of the time on the same page. Let me qualify that. I don't know that it's about always being on the same page. I think the most important thing initially for us is to determine, are we at least reading the same book? Are we at least reading the same book in terms of we believe that God's calling us to this? We believe this is a place that our family's going to go. We believe this is important, and we're going to pursue it. Okay? We are reading the same book. Absolutely. Now, are we on the same page? No. At the time, my wife, let's say, was on page 157, and I was on page 23. Okay? We're reading the same book. You've just read a little faster than I have. Or I've just read a little slower than you have, right? And so here's what we've got to do. Here's what we've got to do. We've got to say, hey, look, you slow down a little bit, and I'm going to commit to speeding up a little bit, and then eventually we're going to meet right where we need to meet. Okay? Right on the same page. So what did that mean? It meant I needed to speed up a little bit. I needed to say yes to something. Okay, yeah, let's go, let's explore this. Let's look into that. Okay, let's go to that orientation class where God then kind of does this gymnastics, this puppeteering, and says, yeah, Jason, how come you're not there to protect that little girl? I go, oh gosh, right? And then I very quickly speed up reading this book. And then at some point, I don't know that we can predict when it's going to happen, but at some point we just kind of know, okay, we're on the same page. We've been reading the same book for a long time, and we're on the same page now. Most of the time, in my experience, it's been the wife that's a little further ahead than the husband. Not all the time. Sometimes it's vice versa. So what does someone do who's a little further ahead? How do they slow down reading a little bit? Maybe they spend more time praying for your spouse. That God would just kind of move in their hearts and open their hearts and soften their hearts to this idea. Maybe, right? Maybe you change some of your language. Maybe instead of fostering, maybe it's, hey, let's start bringing meals to some families. Let's start supporting the local foster pantry. Let's start getting involved and just increasing some proximity a little bit and getting our feet wet a little bit, right? I'm going to take a few steps back if you'll commit to taking a few steps forward. If you'll commit to starting to bring meals and volunteer at the foster pantry. You start taking some steps forward, I'll take some steps back, and we're just going to see what God does as we begin to meet there in the middle. And we're going to be simultaneously praying for each other and praying for our home and praying for clarity and courage for what God wants us to do. Okay, so that's it. That's it for the chapters. I'm going to look real quick at some of this. I love someone says, I feel like that's where my hubby and I were at when I felt the calling to start to foster. Yeah, that's, again, the story over and over and over and over again. Back when we were allowed to travel and I was doing events all the time, and hopefully this fall I'll be back at it, but I've always loved the interaction where I'll be at a conference or at a church or something, and a couple will come up to me, and the husband's usually like a step and a half behind his wife, like hovering over her shoulder. The wife is coming and she's sharing, and we get to meet, and then the husband says something like, my wife's been like forwarding me your blogs for years and like printing them out and showing to me and blah blah blah, and I want to say, come on, man, like, you know you like it, right? And he blames it on his wife all the time, right? It's so fun to see these dynamics of look, we might not be on the same page, but we're reading the same book, and we're going to push each other, and we're going to pray for each other, and we're going to encourage each other, and now here we are. And who would have ever thought, right? So, I love those stories. We found ourselves in the stories of children who needed someone to say yes. We couldn't look away or ignore. These children don't have the luxury to wait or say no. It's never the right time. It's actually always chaos, but we roll with it. Exactly, Abby. I often say that foster care was the constant of chaos, only punctuated by moments of peace and tranquility, right? I very rarely play golf for a number of reasons. I enjoy it, but I literally never play it. And I'm no good, and most of us aren't any good. And so I could go out on the golf course and hit 100 bad shots, which that's a lot. Like just shanking them all over the place, spend more time looking for the ball than actually playing golf, right? But every time I played golf, there's one or two good shots I hit. They just feel good. Like, and I hit it and I think, I don't know if Tiger Woods could have hit a better shot than I just hit, right? Like that just felt good. And it's those one or two good shots that keep me coming back. Because it says to me, hey, you got it in you. Like maybe deep down inside of you, there's a golfer, right? A lot of times foster care is going to feel like we're just shanking 100 shots here and there, left and right. We don't know if anything's sticking. We don't know if anything's working. But then every once in a while, there's these one or two moments of clarity. These one or two conversations that happen, or these one or two moments where, like in the movie, the Mark Wahlberg family movie about foster care, they're on the sidelines of the game, and the little foster daughter comes up to Mark Wahlberg and calls him daddy, right? And turns around and runs off, and he just like, you know, that's one of those, my gosh, this feels good. And the wife is sitting there going, what? Call me mommy, right? Sometimes it's just going to feel like we are all over the place, but every once in a while there's one or two moments where we just realize God's at work in this. Good things are happening. We are moving towards the renewal of all things. It's hard and it's difficult, but gosh, it's worth it. It's worth it. Let's see what else real quick, and then is there ever a time of peace? There will be one day, Jason. That's our hope, right? Just do the next right thing. That's right. Awesome. One step at a time. It's really hard. Vicky says it's really hard fostering kids that are difficult and still have energy for each other. We need to work harder on us, but thankful that we have each other to get through the hard days. Absolutely. 100%. 100%. The absolute best thing that we can do for our kids, for any kids that come into our home, is to give them the gift of a healthy husband and wife, a healthy marriage, to give them a picture of what that looks like, and to set really strong boundaries. Amen to the rhythms. Christy says, marriages have to battle for connection. I feel like our kids are never asleep. My gosh, us last night was rough, right? There was like some squirrel party going on our roof. Our dog was barking all night, and we had other girls at the house last night, and they couldn't get to sleep because of it. And man, right? Uh, Keeping our eyes on Christ, attending Bible study, going to church together, date nights in. Amen. Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you guys for your engagement tonight. Encouragement for single foster mamas. Yes. Yes. First off, on Instagram, great question, great thought. If you've got answers to that, please jump in on that. But we know this incredible single foster mom. I know a couple of them actually, but one of them in particular we've known for quite some time, where we used to live. And I had her write something for me one time, and what she wrote was brilliant. She said that being a single foster mom comes with some unique benefits, right? Like Scripture says, that just this undivided attention. Don't have to worry about a husband and all that. But it also comes with some unique challenges, obviously. And she said, being a single foster mom holds me accountable daily to pressing into the community